Hey everybody, welcome back to K17 Reactions. I am your host Jimmy, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different than all my other videos. Um, Today I'm going to tell part of my story. Now, I know that some of you will hear that and immediately click off of here because you're not interested in my story, and I understand that, and I respect that. That's not a big deal. I'm not on here trying to say that my story is better than anybody else's. My story is worse than anybody else's. But the only thing I can say is my story is unique because it's mine. And everybody out there, you have a story, and your story is unique to you. And the reason I decided to go ahead and do this is because at the end of all my videos, I talk about, if life is uh, causing problems, or if you have issues, or if the world's throwing fiery darts at you, or just whatever's happening in your life to cause issue, there are ways through it. And also, I've had some very positive feedback, and I appreciate that feedback. Thanking me for sharing uh, parts of my story or being vulnerable or whatever, and I appreciate that. Um, and also, like I told you in one of my videos, that a couple of reactors who I personally watched, because I watched reaction videos for about a year before I actually started this channel, because I wanted to get a sense of what other people were doing, find things that I liked, things that I didn't like, and kind of help shape my channel. And two of the reactors that I watched quite a bit of, including the one that I watched more than any of them, and that is Rob Squad Reactions. You have Jay and Amber over there, a young couple who have an excellent music reaction and movie reaction channels. So I would suggest you go over there and check them out if you like seeing good reactors. But anyway, Jay one day last week put out a video and himself becoming very vulnerable with his story. Um, and he talked about his struggles right now with mental health and so forth. And also, Andy and Alex was another show that I liked watching. And Andy did the same thing the very next day. I saw Andy put out a reaction, and he was talking about his mental health and his struggles and everything. So I'm glad to see people doing that and so forth. So I just wanted to get on here and share just a little bit of my life. I have shared before about going through depression for over 40 years of my life. Um, and I just wanted to kind of just put a little bit of my story out there for you, because there are people who have gone through things that are going to be similar to what I've went through, and you may still be struggling with them, or you may have family or friends or whatever. So that's why I just wanted to share. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and share day by day of my life. But I did want to just show some highlights and kind of what um, led up to the issues I've had in my life. So I just want to start out by saying in 1968, and again, don't worry, I'm not going to go into depth about my whole life. But in the fall of 1968, there was a 13-year-old girl who was sexually assaulted by four 16-year-old boys. And 9 months later, I was born. Um, that's how my life started. And that fact, even though I had no control over it, later on in my life, when my mental health issues really started getting worse, um, that's even something I took blame for. I mean, just totally um, ludicrous, but at the same time, you can get yourself to believe a lot of things. But I was adopted within my family. Didn't know that till I was 20 years old. Didn't know who my biological mom was until that point in my life. But at the age of 4 is when the first really tragic thing happened to me. And that's when a 13-year-old boy who lived next door to me um, sexually abused me. Now, at 4 years old, I mean, I can remember this, what I'm about to tell, just like it happened yesterday. And I'm 55 years old now. But my brother had seen this young man take me out into this old car that was in the back of their yard. And he didn't know what he was doing right away. But after a little bit, my mom had told my brother to come get me for dinner. And when he came out there to get me, that's when he discovered what this boy was doing to me and forcing me to do. So he took me home, told my mom about it, and my dad went over to talk to his dad. And my mom, and I don't want anybody to get me mistake what I'm about to say here. I don't blame my mom for any of this. Um, but the way she dealt with it, and having never had to deal with this before, she put me in the shower and she got out the soap and she washed me from head to toe, and even put soap in my mouth, and um, just told me that that was not something that was good to do. But that whole thing scared me when it happened. I can still remember being terrified. And I remember also that she loved me afterwards. She hugged me and told me how much she loved me and talked to me and everything. But just that reaction scared me. And so a year later, when a brother-in-law of mine started doing the same thing to me, I didn't tell anybody. And that lasted until I was 15 years old. And I kept that a secret that entire time. And, I never sought counseling. I never, told doctors or at the time being in the Catholic Church, a priest or anything like that. I kept every bit of that inside. And that did nothing for me but just caused me more and more difficulty the older I got. It really affected my uh, ability to establish relationships. Now, I mean, I had friends and I could sit there and talk to anybody and so forth, but if I wanted to have a relationship with a girl, for instance, I couldn't do it because I was absolutely terrified of rejection. And that's just one of the many things that kind of happened. Um, but I did wind up getting married. I married somebody who I had known for almost 7 years, who was a friend, and it even took everything in my power even to ask her to marry me. But we did get married. We were together for 13 and a half years. We have 6 children together, and then we divorced. And after that, I had 3 more relationships. All of them were the woman who came up and asked me to go out. And back in those days, if a woman showed me interest, I grabbed a hold for dear life because I was so terrified of losing that relationship. And so, anyway, I tell you all that, and also tell you that during this time frame, I became more and more and more depressed. My depression got worse year after year after year. And I was a paramedic, which I've told several times on my videos, for about 20 years. And early on in that, back in the early 90s, I would run calls where people uh, threatened suicide or attempted suicide or committed suicide. And early on, I could not quite grasp what would drive a person to be that desperate to end their lives. And it never really made sense to me. But slowly, as each year passed, as my depression got worse and worse, um, I started realizing, you know, how in my mind, how much suicide made sense. And, I would sit there, and the more I thought about it, the years go by, the more I kind of made it make sense in my own mind. And, just to jump ahead to 2008, I attempted suicide. I was ready for everything to be over. Um, I thought I had convinced myself that I was an embarrassment to my children and to my family, and that everybody would be so much better off if I was just gone. If I was gone, nobody would have to be embarrassed. Nobody would have to, um, you know, be ashamed of having me in the family and everything. That's just how I saw things. And that particular day, I attempted by carbon monoxide poisoning. I got into my garage where I lived. I shut down the house, locked it up tight, and wound up getting into my car, starting it up, and just stayed there waiting for everything to end. And at some point, I went unconscious. Uh, and, there's no good reason why it shouldn't have worked, to be totally honest about it. But it didn't. And at some point, my van ran out of gas. And then ultimately, I was discovered. When I got my test back, my carboxyhemoglobin, which is a test they run for carbon monoxide poisoning, I shouldn't have survived it, but I did. And although at the time I didn't kind of share this opinion, but I've got a friend of mine who's a pastor who I've heard say, and I've heard other pastors say this too, that if you're not dead, God's not done. And looking back on it now, I didn't really agree with that at the time, the way I felt about myself. But now looking back, I can see that a lot more clearly. But it finally took up until just 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago, when I finally dealt with my childhood abuse that I went through. Um, over the years, I had talked to doctors and psychiatrists and therapists and pastors and preachers. And, I had so many people try to help me, and they said good things, or maybe they gave me some medication to help me or something like that. But my key stumbling block through all that was none of the people that I had spoken with about this had ever actually went through childhood sexual abuse. And I kept reasoning in my mind that there's no way that they can know what I'm going through because they hadn't been through it. And finally, my life turned a point to where I had allowed all this hurt and pain and anger to build up inside of me for over 40 years. And, just like an infection, you let an infection go without doing anything about it, and it can fester and get worse and worse and worse until finally something bad happens. And it took me never dealing with um, any of that hurt, pain, or anger until one day the right situation or the wrong situation, however you want to say it, and the wrong thing was said to me, and I just lost it. And 40 years of all of this hurt and pain and everything came rushing out of me. And I wound up being incarcerated because of it. But that incarceration, and I think back to that old if you're not dead, God's not done thing, because it actually took being incarcerated to hear a guy come in from an outside ministry and share his story. And the day he shared his story was the first time he had ever shared it in front of anybody. But he had went through almost identical what I had went through as a child. And when I heard him start talking, I was just on the edge of my seat. And I'm thinking, here's somebody that knows what I went through. And I wound up being able to talk to this man and pray with this man and everything. And that day, I finally was able to get that 1,000-pound weight, that 1,000-pound burden off of my shoulders after all those years. Now, I still have days where I'm depressed. I still have days where, the PTSD kicks my rear end. And, I still have issues. But it took somebody talking to me about their issues, about their tragedy, about things that they went through, to get me to finally realize that, yes, there are people out there who went through what I went through. There are people out there who knows what I'm talking about. And that's what it took for me. Now, since I've been back up here, been home, I've been able to share my story with people in church, at a drug and alcohol rehab, individuals. I've been able to share my story, and by sharing my story, I'm not only potentially helping somebody else, but I'm helping myself also, because I know that nothing that happened to me as a child was my fault. But for years and years of depression and of slowly going downhill year after year, I had convinced myself that I was at fault. And like I started this whole video out talking about me being the product of a sexual assault against a 13-year-old child, I even became so irrational that I blamed myself for that and all the years of hurt that my biological mother went through. If you've went through things like that, I'm here to tell you it was not your fault. Okay? Now, that happening to me did not excuse me for losing my temper and acting out. That I was an adult. I had the choice of either letting something dictate my life, which is what I did for over 40 years, or dealing with it and moving on. So I'm just hoping that by telling and sharing my story, just parts of my story, that anybody watching this, maybe you went through similar abuse or even other types of abuse growing up, and you've never dealt with it. You have let it define who you are instead of defeating it and being who you were meant to be. So the reason I'm making this video, and hey, if only one person views this video, but this helps that one person, I'm happy with it. I don't want pity. I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me. I want to be able to use something bad to potentially do something good. So, saying all that, for those of you who did stay the whole almost 20 minutes and watch this video, I appreciate it. If you have issues that you have not dealt with, then let's start dealing with them. There are people out there who care. There are people out there who will listen. There are people out there who will help you. Okay, I felt like I was alone for over 40 years. I was only alone because I chose that path for my life. In essence, I chose to be alone. Don't make the same mistake I did. And it may not be you, it may be a family member, it may be a friend, it may be an acquaintance. But if you know somebody that my story could possibly help out, send this video to them. And let's just see. And I'm going to end this just like I do all the other ones, and to tell you that there are many ways out there for you to get help. There are many avenues that you can turn on. It can be a doctor, it can be a psychiatrist, it can be a therapist or a counselor, pastor, preacher, next door neighbor. It can be any of those people. With me, it was part of that, and it was also part of my faith. And so I'm going to end this like I do all the other ones by telling you that no matter what happened, no matter if you went through these things, no matter what seems to be thrown in your path, just remember that there is a friend out there, one friend who sticks closer than a brother, always. Man might disappoint you or turn their back on you, but as long as you do your best and follow his rules, he will not disappoint you. Until next time.